大家好，几周以前呢，我专门飞去塔斯马尼亚州采访了塔州的参议员Eric 阿贝茨。他以前在悉尼呢，我们曾经采访过他一次啊，是我们的老朋友了。他呢也是在澳大利亚呢少数几个，而且是越来越少的几个呢，我因在这个人权问题上，或者说对于这个澳洲价值观啊跟中共问题上呢，就是敢于发声的参议员之一。但很不幸呢，这次选举呢，他被因为党内斗争嘛，被从塔斯马尼亚州第一位的位置踢到了第3位。
Thanks for your time. Good to see you again.
Edgar, good to be able to see you here in Tasmania.
Yes. You have been Senator for Tasmania for the last 28 years, since 1994, is that right?
That is correct. I've had the privilege of being a Senator for 28 years and 17 of those years on the front bench, so I would like to think I've had the opportunity to make a substantial contribution both for Tasmania and Australia. And I've still got energy to burn, so I hope the people of Tasmania re-elect me at the next election.
I was not even in college when you were a senator.
Yes.
Okay. But a lot of people haven't realized that you are right now in a not very good position in the Tasmania election, because last year you were demoted to the third. In the last 28 years, you have always been the first pick of Liberal Party in Tasmania, right?
Yes, the election that I stood in 1993, I was number 3 on the ticket, and didn't get elected. Then there was a casual vacancy to which I was appointed, and then thereafter I've always had the privilege of leading the Senate ticket, and for whatever reason the Liberal Party this time round has determined that I should be number 3 on the ticket. There is no doubt it will be substantially difficult to be re-elected, but it is possible. The Liberal Party has won 3 Senate seats at an election. We did so in 2004 when I led the Senate ticket, but before then and since then we haven't been able to get 3 senators re-elected. So I've got a very tough task ahead of me, but I'd like to think I'm up to it, and I'm working exceptionally hard to regain the confidence of the Tasmanian people at the number 3 position.
To be honest, I noticed a trend in Australian politics in the last year or the last couple of months, because a lot of senators who are hawkish on the China issue, about the human rights violation of China, like the late Senator Kimberly Kitchen. Rumors said that she would suffer the same fate as you, basically, down to the 3rd pick of the Labour Party in Victoria. Do you think there's a trend in Australian politics that people who are hawkish about all the human rights violations, they are being squeezed out?
I think that's a very shrewd observation that you make there, Edgar, because it is happening. And I think the reason that it is happening is that too many Australians, both in the Labor Party and the Liberal Party, don't realise what a great society we have with the human rights basically second to none in the world. And so for those of us that see these abuses in China or indeed any other country and call it out, then often do become the target of ill-considered commentary like you're racist or you are prejudicing our trade with China. Don't you realise how many jobs are dependent? And indeed, when I stood up in the party room some years ago to oppose the extradition treaty with China, I was called racist, prejudicing jobs, etc. And I said there are certain things that we just simply cannot set aside for the sake of the dollar. And whilst I'm very much free enterprise, like reward for effort, and I don't mind people making profits, but there is a limit. You've got to be able to say we cannot have profits made, for example, on the back of 1 million Uyghurs in a concentration camp, where we are, to Australia's shame, still getting cheaply made trains into Australia, built, one suspects, with Uyghurs from concentration camps. So look, Senator Kitching, Senator Fierravanti Wells, myself and a few others Kevin Andrews was very strong on the issue of China as well. He lost his endorsement for the House of Representatives. And I think for some people it's seen as a bit too controversial to stand up for the fundamental principles for which our forebears fought and died in the Second World War.
What does that say about Australian politics? Because you did all those respectable things, and Dr. Kimberly Kitching, but you both suffered from. It cost you a lot in the last couple of years. What does that say about Australian politics?
I think there is, especially with the media reporting, a degree of shallowness. And so it's very easy when somebody says we shouldn't have an extradition treaty with China, just label them as racist.
Yeah.
That's so easy to do, rather than say, well, why would somebody have stood up in the party room to oppose an extradition treaty with China and say, now there's a person of principle. There's a person that is willing to call out human rights abuses as they need to be called out and should be called out. So I think the mighty dollar unfortunately drives a lot of this sentiment from the Liberal Party point of view, and within the Labor Party point of view, it's the mighty dollar and potentially the jobs as well, through their trade union connections, that they don't want to see job losses if China doesn't want to trade with us. But my view is that we have to be a principled country. I think we have been, and I've been pleased to see how many other countries around the world have in fact followed suit or opened up their markets to a lot of our products, which were then boycotted by the dictatorship in China.
Yeah, I remember vividly that you were called a dinosaur back by some young, I think it's Sam Destirari, call you dinosaur, and call you a Nazi or something like that.
Yes.
Okay.
And look, they're the sort of slings and arrows that occur in Australian politics, and all I ask people to do is set aside all the slurs and deal with the meat of the issue. What is the detail? The detail is about human rights. Right. And calling me a dinosaur or any other name will not overcome the fact that there are egregious human rights abuses that need to be addressed. And if having the courage to do that earns me the title of dinosaur, then I'll wear that badge very proudly.
How about the Labour Party's policy? I know that Albanese said that he 100% agreed with the government's policy on China, right? But do you think there are going to be some subtle changes to the policy?
I would like to think that there wouldn't be, but every now and then I suspect that Labor tries to walk both sides of the street. And in my view, you can have a good trading relationship with a country with whom you would have difficulties over human rights, such as the current regime in China. Yeah. But I would not stop our trade with them. I think Labor would seek to make a few too many concessions on the issue.
Like what?
Oh, on the issue of principle.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure that Labor would have been as strong as we were in asking for the world, review of the pandemic, how the pandemic started, having an investigation into that. For me, it made common sense that it should be, but once again it was labelled immediately as some sort of anti-China policy, which it wasn't. It was a desire to find out what happened, how it happened, what can we learn from it.
Yes.
And that will be and is of great benefit to the whole world community. I think Labor would have said, yeah, it might be a good idea, but let's not go out on it. Let somebody else do the dirty work for us, and then we might come in behind. Once again, I don't think that's leadership. The whole world community wanted to know what happened with the pandemic, how, why, what can be done in the future. So that I think is a one example, and I fear that with Senator Wong as the foreign spokesman at the moment, that there has been, and the left wing of the Labor Party, a bit too much of a concession to the communist dictatorships in the world, and there aren't that many of them left anymore, thank goodness, but I think they do make some concessions which because they come from the left wing of politics, I would like to think as a Liberal Party and myself, I'm willing to call out human rights abuses wherever they occur.
Yeah, like the 14 grievance by the Chinese
make any
community.
concessions?
Yeah,
Look. I think the Labor Party would be interested in making some concessions if that meant greater trade, because then they could talk about enhanced economic activity in Australia. But as I see it at the moment, our economy is going exceptionally well. We've got a more diversified export relationship now with a whole host of countries, and whilst China has been an exceptionally good trading partner and of benefit to Australia, I'm under no illusion that the only reason China trades with us is not because they like us. They want our goods, they want our services, they want our things, whatever that might be. And similarly, we want the things China makes, and so it's of mutual benefit to us. And so I think we always have to keep that in mind, that with trade, it is of mutual benefit. It's not because one government or one country likes the other. It is for the mutual benefit, and ultimately it's the economic factors that will drive that. And I would like to think that that can be resumed, but part and parcel of our initial interaction with China as China opened up was that with our economic trade and discussions on that front, there would also be a human rights dialogue, because right from the beginning, Australia saw that as being important. And now for the last, 8-9 years, that human rights dialogue has been unilaterally cancelled by the dictatorship in China, something which I regret, and I hope that in the event of a Labor government, they continue to pursue the importance of human rights in China.
Okay, so about this Russia and Ukraine war, I've been covering the war for quite some time. I even talked to some guys, some members from the Russian community in Australia, and they told us about, after the war erupted, their community has suffered some kind of discrimination. You can say discrimination, the kids will call the invaders in school, because they're from Russia. I think we talked about that in our last interview. About Chinese people will call the coronavirus in school because with the government or what happened about the Chinese government. That's the concern of a lot of the people from the Chinese community. This Russia-Ukraine war is like an epitome of what's going to happen to the Chinese community if China decides to invade Taiwan. What can you, as a senator, do to relieve that concern?
That's a very important point that you raise, Edgar, and whenever I've been critical of a regime, I've tried to the very best of my ability to always make sure that I quarantine the people out of the equation and talk about the dictatorship or the leadership or the regime. And it is highly unfair, highly inappropriate, very hurtful, just because you happen to be of Russian origin today to be accused that somehow you're an invader. It would be just as bad if the dictatorship in China were to invade Taiwan and local Chinese here in Australia, or those of Chinese ethnicity, were to be labelled in a particular way. And I suppose I can talk to you about this because I've personally experienced it. I was born in Germany, and when I was growing up, especially in primary school, everybody sat down of an evening and watched the war movies, where the Germans, of course, were always the baddies. And so, in primary school, my German origins were not something that I was pleased about. I think times have moved on, and people no longer seek to say that just because you're a German, you are a National Socialist. Similarly, just because you've got Chinese ethnicity doesn't mean you're a communist. Just because you're a Russian doesn't mean that you're into crony capitalism with the oligarchs and engaged in wholesale corruption. So, that is something that we in Australia need to be exceptionally careful of, especially because we've got such a lovely mix and blend of people from all over the world. And so it's then very easy to pick on a minority person and say, you were responsible for the pandemic, or you're responsible for an invasion, or you're responsible for something else. No, they're not. It is the regimes that are in control that are responsible, not our individual citizens and residents who are here in Australia. And any government must do everything it can to protect from that sort of inappropriate, nasty, hurtful behaviour.
Politicians, they all say that the Chinese government and the Chinese people are different, but none of the people in in Australian politics, they do enough to distinguish these two.
Right.
Yes. Is there anything that you or the Liberal Party or anyone from the Australian politics can do to draw the line better, more clearer?
Look, if there are, and I fully take your word for it, that there are elements of the Chinese community, and quite potentially large elements, that feel that that line hasn't been drawn sufficiently,
Right.
well, in that case, each one of us, including me, has to work harder to ensure that that line is made very, very clear, that that delineation is made, that just because you come from a particular country doesn't mean you're responsible for the behaviour of its government.
My understanding is that people from the left side of the political spectrum, they deliberately try to not to draw the line because it's to their advantage. Yeah. But the thing is that people from the right side, I don't think we hear enough from the people on the right side, like you, to be honest. To try to say that loudly, like, please, these two are different, totally different. If you need to, because every time you criticize Communist Party, Labour Party or Green Party, they will say that you have criticized Chinese people.
Yes.
You're being racist.
Yes.
It seems to me there's no solution. There's no way out of this conundrum. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Look, and that is where people such as myself, but all parliamentarians, just have to try to make that distinction to the very best of our ability to ensure that people aren't hurt. I still remember some time ago where there was a parliamentarian who said on TV in response to a situation, he said, "We're not in Germany." Of course, referring to the National Socialist regime of about 40 or more years earlier.
Yes.
But the German community here in Tasmania felt very aggrieved, and I got phone calls to my office saying, you've got to tell this person that that's very hurtful. He should have said this is not a National Socialist government, and so it shouldn't be doing it. But he used shorthand and said Germany or German. And similarly, we have a duty and obligation to ensure that we differentiate. And the fact that we haven't done it sufficiently is, I suppose, a reflection that too often, especially in interviews, you try to talk in a short form. So China, rather than the communist dictatorship of China, and I try to say that as much as I possibly can so people know I differentiate the regime from the people, and nearly always it's the people that are suffering under that regime. And so it's completely unfair to link the people that are suffering with the atrocities of the regime.
Is there anything we can do, we as the community member, to draw the line? What do you think?
There's a very good question. The Australian psyche might be that if the Chinese community were to say, you know, please don't link us in with the government from the country from where we've come from, some people might sort of say, oh, I don't know what the public reaction to that would be. I think the obligation is more on those of us who are not of Chinese origin to make that distinction so that the Chinese community here in Australia does not feel the need to do so. So I think the obligation on that one is very much on the leadership and all those of us in public life to make sure that that delineation, that separation is very clear. And there are those that would like to bring it together and say, well, you know, as soon as you criticise, you're being racist, and how hurtful is that, to try to garner votes from the local community. But I think that's a very short-term game, and those that are living here in Australia, I suppose, are here for one reason. They think they've got a better life here than they would back in China. We've got a lot to be thankful for, and let's all work together and make sure that there's no cohort in the community that feels unwelcomed.
Thank you very much, Senator. I wish you a very successful campaign and the result in the next election.
Thank you very much, and fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.